Is it because I don't own a single dress? Is that why you look at me like I'm a problem someone else should have solved? Maya watched his face for something, anything. The man across the low-slung table, Tatsuya Ishikawa, did not react. His stillness was an art form. He sat with a ramrod-straight posture that should have looked unnatural in the plush, minimalist surroundings of the private club in Shinjuku, but on him, it looked like the room was built around his spine. He wore a suit the color of a starless midnight, tailored with a precision that suggested it was more armor than clothing. The only break in the severe perfection was the intricate blue-black ink of a dragon's tail peeking from his left cuff. Her father, a man shrinking in his own expensive suit, shifted beside her. "Maya, please," his voice was a frayed whisper. Tatsuya's eyes, dark and flat as polished obsidian, finally moved from some distant point over her shoulder to meet hers. They held no warmth, no curiosity, only a faint, dismissive appraisal. Then, the corner of his mouth ticked upward. It was not a smile. It was the precursor to a laugh, a dry, humorless sound that scraped the quiet of the room. "I am not concerned with your wardrobe," he said, his English perfect, each word a carefully placed stone. "Your father has made a series of unfortunate decisions. His debt is now my concern. And you," he gestured with one long-fingered hand, a casual flick of the wrist that felt like a judgment, "are the settlement." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Settlement. Not a bride, not a person. A line item on a ledger of failure. Maya felt a cold fury crawl up her throat, but she swallowed it down. Her father had explained it in the car, his words tumbling over each other in a panicked rush. He'd borrowed from the wrong people, made promises he couldn't keep. The Ishikawagumi did not accept payment plans. They collected. She had thought it was a joke, a sick, twisted threat to scare her father straight. But sitting here, in the oppressive silence of this room, with men in dark suits standing like statues in every corner, she knew. This was real. She was 18 years old, a high school graduate with a scholarship to study architecture, and she was being traded like property. "I'm not an object," she said, her voice low but clear. The hoodie she wore, a soft, worn gray, suddenly felt like a child's security blanket. Her jeans felt flimsy. She was out of her depth, a swimmer pulled into a riptide, and all she could do was try not to drown. Tatsuya's gaze flickered over her again, from her worn sneakers to the defiant set of her jaw. "In my world," he said, the amusement gone, replaced by a cold certainty, "everything is an object until it proves its value. Your father has offered you as a gesture of alliance, a marriage to seal his loyalty and erase his debt." He leaned forward, just an inch, but the movement shifted the gravity of the room. "He believes this makes you valuable." I remain unconvinced. The insult was so clean, so surgical, it left her breathless. He wasn't just dismissing her, he was dismissing the entire premise of her sacrifice. "Then don't accept," Maya challenged, ignoring her father's sharp intake of breath. "Tell him the deal is off. Take his business, his money, whatever it is you want. Leave me out of it." For the first time, a flicker of something other than contempt crossed Tatsuya's face. It was surprise, faint and quickly suppressed. He looked at her father, whose face was now ashen. "Your daughter has a spine," Tatsuya observed. "A pity you do not share the trait," he stood, a fluid motion of contained power. The men in the room straightened, their attention sharpening. "The arrangement stands." An oath was made. He walked around the table, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick rug. He stopped not in front of her father, but in front of her. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. Close up, she could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar and something like cold smoke clinging to his suit. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that only made the rest of his face seem more flawlessly carved. "You will come with me now," he stated. It was not a request. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced her anger. "No." He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. "Your refusal is irrelevant. The debt is owed. The price has been named." He looked at one of his men, a burly figure by the door. Takeda, see that she is escorted. Her father will remain here to finalize the transfer of his assets. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at the table, a broken man. The betrayal was a physical blow. He wasn't just giving her away, he was leaving her here. Takeda moved toward her. Maya flinched back, her chair scraping against the floor. Don't touch me. Tatsuya's hand shot out, not touching her, but hovering in the air between them. A command for his man to halt. Takeda froze instantly. You will find, Maya, Tatsuya said, and the way he spoke her name was different, deliberate, as if testing its weight on his tongue, that my world operates on discipline. You will learn it. He lowered his hand and turned toward the door. Bring her. There was no choice. Not really. She could scream, fight, make a scene. It would only end one way. With a cold knot of dread in her stomach, she stood. She gave her father one last, searing look of contempt. He flinched, but still did not look up. She walked out of the room on her own 2 feet, Takeda a half step behind her. She did not look back. She followed the severe line of Tatsuya Ishikawa's back through a maze of quiet corridors and into a private elevator. The doors slid shut, encasing them in polished steel and silence. That was the moment everything changed. She was no longer her father's daughter, no longer a student with a future. She was a debt, and she belonged to the most dangerous man in Tokyo. The elevator descended, and she felt like she was falling into the earth itself, leaving the ordinary world behind forever. The doors opened into a pristine, underground garage where a black sedan waited, its engine purring. He held the door for her, a gesture of mock chivalry that was more menacing than any threat. As she slid onto the cold leather, she knew this was not just a car ride. It was the beginning of a life sentence. The penthouse was a cage of glass and steel perched atop the city. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Tokyo glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of light and life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Everything inside was monochrome. White marble floors, black leather sofas, chrome fixtures that gleamed under recessed lighting. It was less a home and more a monument to wealth and control. It was sterile, cold, and utterly silent. Tatsuya left her standing in the center of the vast living room while he spoke in low, rapid Japanese to Takeda. She caught her own reflection in the dark glass of the window, a small, defiant figure in a gray hoodie, completely out of place, like a weed growing through a crack in the marble. When he was done, Takeda bowed and left, the heavy front door clicking shut with an unnerving finality. This will be your home, Tatsuya said, walking past her to pour a drink from a crystal decanter. The amber liquid caught the light. There are rules. You will not leave this apartment without my permission and without an escort. You will not contact anyone from your former life. Your phone, he held out his hand. She clutched the phone in her pocket. It was her only link to everything she had ever known. No. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes watching her over the rim of the glass. He set it down with a soft click. Do not make me take it from you. The quiet threat in his voice was more effective than a shout. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. She was on the 50th floor. With a shaking hand, she pulled out her phone and placed it on the black granite of the bar. He slid it away without a glance. A housekeeper will bring you whatever you need. Your room is at the end of the hall, he said, already turning away, dismissing her. That was it. No further explanation. No attempt to make this palatable. She was a piece of furniture he had been forced to acquire, and he was putting her in a corner to be ignored. The anger was back, hot and sharp. Is that all I am to you? She asked, her voice louder than she intended. A prisoner? He stopped, his back to her. You are the consequence of a foolish man's actions. What you become beyond that is yet to be determined. He walked into a room she presumed was his office and closed the door, leaving her alone in the crushing silence. Days bled into one another. A silent, older woman named Mrs. Tanaka brought her meals and a selection of clothes, silks and cashmeres in shades of gray, black, and white. Maya refused them, staying in her hoodie and jeans. It was a small, pathetic rebellion, but it was hers. She spent her time exploring the penthouse, every inch of its cold perfection. She found a library filled with books on history and strategy, a gym with equipment she didn't know how to use, and a single, locked door she learned to avoid. Tatsuya was a ghost. He left before she woke and returned late at night. They existed in the same space but in different time zones. Sometimes, she would hear his voice from his office, a low, authoritative murmur. She learned the sound of his footsteps on the marble, the soft click of his office door. She was a ghost in his life, and he was a predator whose territory she happened to inhabit. One night, unable to sleep, she found herself outside his office. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking through the crack, she saw him not at his desk, but standing before a small, recessed shelf. He held a simple silver frame in his hands. His shoulders, usually so rigid, were slumped. For a single, unguarded moment, the mask of the unfeeling Yakuza boss was gone, replaced by a profound and aching sorrow. He traced the glass of the frame with his thumb, a gesture of such gentle reverence it made her breath catch. He must have sensed her. He stiffened, and in a blink, the mask was back. He placed the frame back on the shelf and turned. His eyes locked on her in the dim hallway. "What are you doing?" His voice was ice. She didn't have an answer. She should have run, but she was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the crack she'd just witnessed in his armor. He strode to the door and pulled it open, his large frame filling the doorway. "My office is private. I couldn't sleep," she stammered. Her eyes darted to the shelf behind him. She saw the frame clearly now. It held a photo of a smiling young woman with Tatsuya's same dark eyes. She looked no older than Maya. His gaze followed hers, and a cold fury unlike anything she had seen before hardened his face. "Get out." She backed away, her heart hammering. That night, she understood. His wound was not a matter of business or territory. It was a person, a woman he had loved, and, she suspected, a woman he had lost. That was his vulnerability, the one thing in his fortress of ice that could still bleed. The next week, the fragile, unspoken truce of their cohabitation shattered. Tatsuya informed her they would be attending a dinner. "It is a formality," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My associates wish to meet the woman who settled the American's debt." Mrs. Tanaka laid out a black silk dress. It felt like a costume. Maya stared at it, then at her own reflection. She put it on. The fabric was cold against her skin. When she emerged, Tatsuya was waiting by the door. He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. For a second, she thought she saw that flicker of surprise again. "It seems you do own a dress," he commented dryly. The drive was silent and tense. The car, another black sedan, moved through the neon-drenched streets of Ginza. She felt his presence beside her like a physical weight. As they pulled up to a discreet, high-end restaurant, she saw Takeda and another man in the car ahead of them tense up. "What is it?" she asked. "Stay in the car," Tatsuya ordered, his hand already on the door handle. Then chaos erupted. A dark van screeched to a halt beside them, and men in dark suits, not his own, spilled out. The sound of gunfire cracked the night. Tatsuya moved with a speed that was terrifying. He shoved her down, his body covering hers as the window beside her head exploded inward, showering them with fractured glass. "Down," he roared, his voice a guttural command right by her ear. She could feel the heat of his body, the solid wall of his chest against her back. He smelled of cedar and cordite. In the terrifying intimacy of the moment, pressed together as the world dissolved into noise and violence, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of the world outside the shield of his body. The firefight was short and brutal. She heard Tatsuya giving sharp orders in Japanese, the precise, economical sounds of his own weapon firing. Then, silence, punctuated by the groan of a wounded man and the distant wail of sirens. He moved off her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight. He scanned her with an intensity that had nothing to do with dismissal. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked past her, his jaw tight with fury. Saito, he growled.
Arriba al clan.
Later, back in the penthouse, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a shaky exhaustion in its wake. Paramedics had checked her over. She was fine, save for a few scratches from the glass. Tatsuya had a long, shallow gash on his forearm. He refused medical attention, instead pouring himself a drink with a hand that was perfectly steady. His men were giving their reports in the living room. Maya, huddled in a blanket Mrs. Tanaka had given her, listened. They were dissecting the ambush, trying to figure out how the Saito clan knew their route. They were waiting. They knew the car, Takeda said. Maya's mind replayed the scene. The van, the way it had pulled up. Something was wrong. It wasn't the car, she said softly. The men stopped talking. Tatsuya turned to look at her. What did you say? They weren't looking at the car, she repeated, her voice stronger now. When the van stopped, the man who got out first, he didn't look at the driver's side. He looked at the roof. Right above my head. She stood up, walking toward the windows. They weren't tracking the car. They were tracking something on it. Or in it. Her mind raced back to her phone. He had taken it. Where was it? But that didn't make sense. Her eyes fell on the simple, elegant necklace Mrs. Tanaka had insisted she wear with the dress. It was a gift, she had said. From him. She reached up and her fingers closed around the small, cool pendant. Tatsuya's eyes followed the movement. A dark understanding dawned on his face. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his fingers brushing hers as he examined the pendant. With a sharp tug, he ripped it from her neck. He turned it over. Embedded in the intricate silverwork was a tiny, almost invisible black. A tracker. The room was silent. His men stared, a mixture of shock and shame on their faces for having missed it. Tatsuya looked from the tracker in his palm to her face. He saw not a child or a pawn, but someone who saw things. Someone who had survived. It wasn't a gift from you, she stated, the pieces clicking into place. No, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. It was a gift from your father. Delivered this morning. The betrayal was a fresh, deep wound. Her own father had marked her for slaughter to curry favor with his new master's enemies. Tatsuya crushed the necklace in his fist. For the first time, she saw the violence he kept so carefully leashed flicker in his eyes. And, for the first time, she realized it was not directed at her. He made a deliberate choice to stay when he could have left her in that car. He had shielded her. And she, in turn, had just shown him how his enemies were hunting him. The space between them crackled with a new, unspoken tension. He saw her now, and that was far more dangerous than being ignored. The aftermath of the ambush changed the atmosphere in the penthouse. The silence was no longer empty, it was heavy, fraught with the unspoken. Tatsuya's presence became more constant. He worked from his office, the door often left open. He was watching her, she knew, with a new, calculating intensity. He no longer saw her as a piece of cargo. He saw her as a variable, an unknown quantity in his precise equation of power. Her father was dealt with. Tatsuya didn't give her details, and she didn't ask for them. He simply said, his disloyalty has been addressed. He will no longer be a factor. The cold finality of the statement was enough. A part of her should have felt grief, but all she felt was a numb, hollow relief. The man who had sold her was gone. One afternoon, she found herself standing before his open office door again. He was on the phone, his back to her, and his voice was raw in a way she'd never heard. He was speaking Japanese, but the emotion needed no translation. It was grief and fury, tightly coiled. When he hung up, he stood motionless for a long moment before turning, and he saw her there. He didn't order her out. It is the anniversary, he said, his voice flat, of my sister's death. He gestured to the photograph on the shelf, the one of the smiling girl. Akari, the Saito clan. It was them. It was a message to my father. They took her from a park. She was 16 inch. He looked at Maya, and his eyes were not those of a Yakuza boss, but of a brother who had failed. I was supposed to be watching her. I was 18. I got distracted. By the time I realized she was gone, he stopped, the muscle in his jaw working. They left her body where my father would find it. A lesson in humility. The confession hung between them, a staggering weight. It was the key to him, the shame he carried, the cold rage that fueled his entire existence. He had failed to protect the woman he was responsible for, and he had spent every day since ensuring he would never fail like that again. And now, another young woman was under his roof, a responsibility forced upon him. Her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was all she could say. He gave a short, bitter nod. "Sorrow is a luxury. We deal in debts." He walked to his desk, the mask of control settling back over his features. But the crack had been exposed. She had seen the man beneath the monster. The threat from the Saito clan escalated. It was no longer about territory, it was personal. They knew Tatsuya had a new weakness, a new woman in his house. One evening, Mrs. Tanaka was preparing dinner when a package was delivered. Takeda intercepted it, his instincts sharp. It was a small, ornate box. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a single, dead canary. And a photo of Maya, taken through the window of the penthouse with a long-range lens. Tatsuya's rage was a cold, silent thing. He cleared the penthouse of all staff except for Takeda. The glittering cage became a fortress. He barely let her out of his sight. The forced proximity was no longer awkward, it was electric. They would read in the same room, the only sound the turning of pages. He would watch her sketch in a notebook she'd found, buildings, skylines, abstract forms. He never commented, but he watched. One night, the tension broke. He found her on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. The wind was cool, whipping strands of her hair across her face. "You should not be out here," he said, his voice close behind her. "It is not safe." "Nowhere is safe, is it?" she replied, not turning. "Not with you." He came to stand beside her, his shoulder almost brushing hers. The space between them hummed. "No," he admitted. "But you are safer with me than you are without me." She finally turned to face him.
Why?
"Why protect me? I'm just a deal your enemies can use against you. A liability." His gaze was intense, searching her face in the dim light from the city. "I told myself it was a matter of honor. An oath to your father, however worthless he proved to be. An insult from the Saitos that could not go unanswered." He took a step closer, closing the small distance between them. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I was lying to myself." Her breath caught. This was it. The confession that was more dangerous than any declaration of love. "When I saw that tracker on you," he continued, his voice a low rasp, "and I knew they had marked you as mine to be slaughtered. The thought of them succeeding was unacceptable." He said her name then, Maya, and it was different. It was not a label. It was a possession. A claim. He lifted a hand, his fingers hesitating for a second before they brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was featherlight, but it sent a shock straight through her. The silence stretched, thick with everything they couldn't say. The enemy made their move a week later. They didn't come with guns. They came with subtlety. Tatsuya was called to an urgent meeting across town, a supposed emergency, with one of his shipping fronts. He left her with Takeda and 2 other guards. It felt wrong. Too easy. An hour after he left, men in the uniforms of a high-end cleaning service arrived at the service entrance. They had credentials, a work order. It was flawless. Takeda was suspicious, but the paperwork was perfect. It was Maya who saw it. One of the cleaners had a tattoo on his wrist, the same stylized scorpion she had seen on one of the men from the ambush. She didn't scream. She acted. While Takeda was distracted, she grabbed the heaviest object she could find, a chrome sculpture from a side table, and smashed the fire alarm panel by the elevator. Alarms blared, emergency lights flashed, and the building's lockdown procedure began. It was the diversion they needed. In the ensuing chaos, she saw her chance. Takeda was fighting, holding them off. She could run. The service stairs were her only path. She could get lost in the city, disappear. But she didn't. She ran to the office, to the intercom system she'd seen him use. Her hands flew across the controls, patching into the garage frequency she'd overheard him use before. Tatsuya. It's a trap. They're here. In the penthouse. A man burst into the office, one of the fake cleaners. He grabbed her, his hand clamping over her mouth. She fought, kicking and struggling, but he was too strong. He dragged her out of the office, toward the living room where the fight was raging. Takeda was down, injured but not dead. The last thing she saw before a cloth was pressed over her face, its chemical sweetness filling her lungs, was the victorious sneer on the face of Genji Saito, the clan leader himself, stepping into the room. Then, darkness. When she woke, the world was a swaying, dark space. The smell of salt and diesel. She was in the back of a van. Her hands were tied. Genji Saito sat across from her, calmly cleaning his fingernails with a small, sharp knife. "The little bird sings," he said with a thin smile. "Ishikawa is on his way. He is predictable in his rage. Especially when it comes to the women he is supposed to protect." He leaned forward, his face unpleasantly close. "He failed his sister. Tonight, he will fail you, too." Fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, clear anger. They thought she was a pawn. A damsel. They were wrong. While Saito monologued, boasting of his plan to lure Tatsuya to an abandoned warehouse at the docks, she wasn't just listening. She was memorizing. The names he mentioned, the positions of his men, the exact location of the trap. She filed it all away, a weapon he was unknowingly handing her. Tatsuya came, not with rage but with ice. His men hit the warehouse with surgical precision. The rescue was brutal and swift. Tatsuya himself pulled her from the van, cutting her bindings with a knife. His face was a mask of cold fury. He searched her for injuries, his hands surprisingly gentle. "I'm okay," she said, her voice hoarse. Back at the penthouse, which was now swarming with his men cleaning up the mess, he took her into the office and closed the door. He was cleaning a cut on her cheek with an antiseptic wipe. "They said you called me," he said, his focus on the task. "They were talking," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Saito. He said everything, where he was moving his product, who his main distributor in the port is. He has a meeting tomorrow night at Pier 7 to finalize it." She delivered the information in a flat, even tone. She didn't tell him how she'd gotten it, how she'd had to listen to the man who kidnapped her brag for an hour. She just gave him the weapon. She had crossed a line. This wasn't self-defense. This was intelligence. She was an active participant in his war. He stopped, the wipe hovering over her skin. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw not a victim, but an ally. A queen on his chessboard, not a pawn. "Maya," he said, and the single word was filled with a dawning, dangerous respect. He finished cleaning the cut, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long. "When they took you," he began, his voice low and rough. "The quiet in this house was a poison. I have not felt that since my sister." He met her eyes. "I will not feel it again." It was a vow. A promise forged in violence and fear. He was claiming her not as a debt, but as his. And in the silent, wrecked penthouse, surrounded by the evidence of his brutal world, she didn't feel afraid. She felt found. The final confrontation was set for the following night at Pier 7. Tatsuya used the information she'd given him to lay a devastating trap. But he didn't leave her behind. He brought her to a secure location overlooking the docks, a command post of sorts, with Takeda, his arm in a sling, at her side. "I want you to see this," Tatsuya had said. "I want you to see what we do to those who threaten what is mine." From the window, she watched as the Saito clan walked into a perfectly executed pincer movement. It was not a battle, it was an eradication. Tatsuya moved through the chaos like a phantom, his movements economical and lethal. He was not a businessman playing at being a gangster. He was a predator in his natural habitat. But Saito was a cornered rat. In the final moments, he broke through the line, making a desperate run for Tatsuya. One of Tatsuya's oldest and most loyal lieutenants, a man named Hiroshi, who had always looked at Maya with suspicion, threw himself in front of his boss. He took the bullets meant for Tatsuya. The cost of this war, paid in blood. Maya watched it all, her face impassive. She felt no horror, only a grim sense of finality. This was the world she had chosen. After the sirens faded and the cleanup began, Tatsuya found her still standing at the window.
He didn't speak.
He came to her and took her hand, turning it over in his. His thumb traced the faint, silvery line of a scar on her wrist from when Sato's man had grabbed her. It was a permanent mark. "The Ishikawa clan owes you a debt," he said, his voice quiet in the aftermath. She looked from their joined hands to his face. The cold mask was gone. In its place was something raw and real. "This isn't about the clan," she said. His dark eyes held hers, a universe of unspoken things passing between them. "No," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "It is not," he acknowledged it. He acknowledged her. Not as a wife by force, or a debt, but as the woman who had become the unshakable center of his violent world. He would not lose her as he had lost his sister. He would burn the world down first. Weeks passed. The city healed. The underworld settled into a new, quiet order under Tatsuya's absolute control. The penthouse was no longer a cage, but a sanctuary, a fortress. One evening, Maya stood on the balcony, looking out over the endless ocean of lights that was Tokyo. She was no longer wearing the gray hoodie, a relic of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She wore a tailored black jumpsuit of her own design, elegant and severe. It was her version of power, her own armor. She heard him approach, the familiar sound of his footsteps on the marble. He came to stand beside her, not touching, but the air between them was thick, a living thing. He followed her gaze to the sprawling city below, their empire of glass and shadow. "You could have left," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of a truth he had accepted. After the Saito clan was broken, the doors had been unlocked. She was free. "I know," she replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She did not need to look at him. She felt his presence like a part of her own heartbeat now. She had had her chance to run back to the ordinary world, and she had turned her back on it without a second thought. This world of danger, loyalty, and brutal honesty was more real to her than anything she had known before. She had not been rescued. She had chosen. "This is my home now," she said, and the words were not a surrender, but a declaration. A truth that settled over them as surely as the night settled over the city. The tomboy in the hoodie was gone, and in her place was a queen,